Hey, team players, and welcome back. Today we are going to be doing another Underdog Best Ball Draft. We know the Super Bowl just happened, but we can never sense the demand that people have for doing the drafts. And this isn't just a mock draft or just, hey, we'll see what we're doing. We're actually putting our money down. It's an Underdog Best Ball format, which means it's half PPR. We're really excited to be doing this and bring this to you for you guys. And this is really how we're going to be doing a lot of the offseason until, quite frankly, Underdog stops letting us buy the tickets to come in and do it. So we love it. We love absolutely everything we're at. When we look at where the Underdog community is right now on their ADP, we are seeing a lot of players start moving around a little bit. And I want to start, as this particular draft for this episode is filling up, focusing on the Cowboys. Because Dallas is a team here that obviously CeeDee Lamb is going to be going in the first round in any league. But where's the rest of them going and where should it be? And this isn't just a who's going to be on the team situation. It also is the actual value of the number one running back, the number two receiver in Dallas, going to be worth anything? And that to me is the broader question that we really haven't flushed out yet. And as I look at the Cowboys, they're totally fine running a one-man show under McCarthy. The new coach obviously will put changes into this, but seeing how good CeeDee Lamb is and seeing how many holes are in the Cowboys overall, they need to fix a lot more than just adding a running back and a receiver to this roster to make them a top 10 offense next year. It's just there's a lot of gaps that are here. And while we both have different takes as far as who are going to be the fulfillments of these gaps, the issue really remains is, are they capable of returning back to where they were this fantasy season? Because in real life, the Cowboys certainly need to focus on getting that line right, just for the simple fact that Dak keeps getting hurt. You have to make him so that he can't get hurt. They basically need to be the Philadelphia Eagles in terms of having the best line in the league to protect him. You look at the only line that's comparable to that, which is Detroit's. Goff is a complete statue, and he almost won the MVP. I still think he should have won the MVP. But when we look at this overall, the Cowboys have to use their resources to go in that direction. The Cowboys also have to learn how to stop the run. So when you look at those two massive needs in terms of any NFL roster, you're really in a spot where how are they actually going to do this and give you a solid number two? And I think the answer is already in-house, because it has to be, because there's not enough resources to go out and to get the other possibilities. So I bring this all up. Bob will be with us here in a moment or two. And like I said, this is going to be an awesome live, guys. I'm really excited for this draft that's about to kick off. We've got two people left to jump into it, and it's going to be awesome. Let's do some drafting, guys. That's where we're at. We'll see where they put us here. And about to start. Get it all set up for you guys. So for those team players jumping in and asking questions, obviously Bob is normally the one who does this, as I am the one pushing the buttons and doing the actual draft selecting themselves. But to let you guys know, that's just the logistics of how we go about and doing that. Also, we're going to be testing something out today, having a little bit more zoomed in than normal. So you're going to be able to see really the deeper picks. Just see if this format works better for you guys as the team players out there watching. And that's really what this is all about. This is all about for you guys as the team players. It's not about seeing me. And actually, quite frankly, I think we're going to do this in a way where you don't see me at all. You just hear me. And we go through the draft as it is. Because it's really all about getting the right players on board. And sitting here in the 2 slot, you guys know me. I am absolute running back whore. And I don't think that's going to change. And when we talked about entering into last year, the reason we weren't big on Jamar was because we were ultimately flat out afraid of what Burrow was going to bring to the situation. But Burrow didn't really end up all that hurt after September, and he ended up winning the whole Triple Crown, the whole 9 yards. So Of the running backs, Saquon, Bijan, and Gibbs, I am very, very much into the Bijan department. And this is for a couple of different reasons. One of which is that, you know, London's not that good. London, in my opinion, is probably one of the most overrated players in the entire league. And as he gets into the situations of actually, trying to communicate and be out there with the team, he doesn't really bring it all that well. So I look at this as a spot of, do we really want to have Gibbs, who's just one of many, or Bijan, who's really the one of only? And that's where I really like about what's going on here by selecting Bijan and to going through with that. So that's my starting point for you here, team players. I'm going to be doing the comments in my phone here. As again, we're trying to be doing this one here a little bit differently without Bob in house. He's going to be popping in a little bit later, is my understanding, and kind of go through there and give you guys all your answers. So what's up, Austin? Yeah, looks great. Glad you like it. Glad that you like it and it's coming through. We're having some good old stuff here on our side, making everything work and go great. So appreciate you shooting out. Let me know it's looking good. So one of the cool parts of being nearly on the turn in the 2 spot is I get lots of time to talk to you guys about the breakdowns. I know I mentioned at the beginning of the show that CD is kind of in the same argument I have for why I like Bijan. I'm not in love with the Cowboys overall. They have to fix both of their lines in the trenches. But CD is, like I said, he's in a spot where he's essentially the one and only. And I compare that very differently to either a J. Jeff or a Collins in this regard. Although I do think Houston's offense is going to take off, J. Jeff is going to be having talent around them. Minnesota does not need to rebuild their entire offensive line. Now, they need defensive love. There's no doubt about that. But there is a very real chance that Minnesota has an upgraded skill room overall compared to what they had this year, which would naturally lead to less volume going towards J. Jeff. Collins looks like it's the opposite. There's going to be him becoming more of the one and only because they need to rebuild the line as well. And that's one of the common threads that I have for looking in this draft. When I'm going for established players, looking for those that are not going to have a legitimate new competition entering into their roster and entering into their space. It's one of the very important things that I think for this type of the year to really look at, because there's so many teams that have opportunities to really build out, but are they going to be able to do it? And we look at here some of the upcoming picks that I got on my board that I don't know if any of you guys are team players are in this draft here with me or not. So I hope you are. If you are, just pop in, let me know, because it's all about letting the draft happen and letting it happen well, right? So let us know if you're also in this draft with us and watching us live. Get a little inside information from my roster here. But as we look at this upcoming turn, I really would love to have 3 running backs and call it a day. But that being said, one of my dudes right there in JT just went. We look at the other running backs that Underdog has as its spot. Josh Jacobs up next, then comes Bucky, Bryce Hall, Chase Brown, and Cook. So for me, I absolutely am going to be taking Bucky. He's ahead of ADP, but knowing that the first guy took the receiver and that I only like one of the running backs anywhere near the top of this list until we get to James Cook, I'm absolutely going to go with Bucky. And the only guy who might have even swayed me just went there in Ladd McConkey. And, Ladd's another one of these guys in this situation where, yeah, they're going to get another running back, but the best player on that team by far is still Herbert, and Herbert is going to be the one who gets the ball. So another player that, again, another situation that you guys heard me hate upon a lot last year was the New York Jets. And by the way, I was completely right on that. But they're going to be jettisoning away Adams for sure. Rodgers isn't going to be there. My pick was going to be Garrett Wilson. It was a guy that I really wanted to do. The next one that I'm going to take up is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated receivers in football. He's going to get paid bank like crazy, and that's Higgins. wherever he ends up, they are going to use him as the number one of number ones. And Higgins getting the absolute value, I think he's going to really truly should be a second rounder. I think he's going to get pushed forward, especially if he goes to a team with a competent quarterback. I know for me, it might be a bucket list of hope, like the media always wants to make the prettiest situation. But Higgins in Washington just makes absolutely so much sense to me, and I absolutely love it. So, and that's why I lean into him, because I know he's going to be the stud. Might not be in the same light as CeeDee Lamb, where there's no competition around him, but I do think that he's going to be the one that we really look at and go, wow, that guy's a dude. Another guy that I'm thinking about will be in that same category, who's probably never coming back to me, is Najigba. It's unknown whether or not Metcalf stays in Seattle. They have a lot of really weird salary cap problems, and they're coming up with a lot of weird solutions thrown at the board, such as trading Geno. And how deprived this quarterback market is, getting rid of Geno Smith to me seems absolutely asinine. So I bring that up, but because that's what's going on in Seattle, these types of thoughts. And, it's just not a situation that's going to be conducive to growth. Now, you guys who have been watching for the last couple of drafts know that there's some people that I am really into, that I like putting upon my teams a lot, that I'm going to do again in this one, really line it up, especially since I don't have Bob here to yell at me. But some of those players, just to throw them out here, like my quarterback is almost always going to be Justin Fields. I believe he's going to be absolutely dominant, just as he was the last time he was a true starter. Kind of regardless of where he ends up, I just really like his value there. Jalen Daniels is another guy that I don't see having a setback, although it's totally possible. I see Stroud and Houston overall taking a major step forward. And these are some of the guys I want to make sure that are always on my roster. Now, if I don't get Daniels here, it's not the end of the world. I would love to do it because Daniels and Fields together seems like an unstoppable combination, but it won't be the end of the world to make me sad either. So if not, I'm definitely going to be going receiver. And one of the things that we talked about in the last week we did this thing was Bob didn't like the fact that basically Rashee Rice was my number 2 receiver. If I can get him on the roster as a number 3 receiver, on the other hand, you're looking at a completely different world. And that's really what we're going to try to pull here. Part of it is that when I look at the running back space, there is really no one else in this area that I like. Despite the fact that I think that Carolina is a team on the upswing, I do not believe that they are going to be really anywhere near taking Chuba Hubbard this high. I just don't want to do it. I don't want to see it. So as I look here, I had this like little internal debate every single time this question comes up. Devontae or Jameson Williams. So JMO to me really blew the thing out of the water, right? But I'm not sure that it's even feasible for it to happen again. I mean, in so many ways, Detroit had their ultimate year. Goff was a near MVP. We're able to see basically everything that running game work. It slowed down a little bit when Monty got there. It's a very good offense, don't get me wrong, but I don't see a way in which it stays there in this spot. Also, I want to point this out, that every time I've seen Jamar go first overall, Burrow has gone either fourth or in this turn, in these 2 picks. And I have to say, I think it really limits your build moving forward when you do it like that. So if I can, either Rishi or Olave will be my next pick. It's going to be Rishi. And I really like the way that my receiving room's looking right now. Getting Higgins, Metcalf, and Rishi, each going to be the stud on their respective team. Again, if Metcalf is still in Seattle, I do believe he's going to have a massive year. I think they are poised to be one of the offenses that can really take off. And Seattle is certainly a team that I am not shying away from in any capacity. I think that that's a really good roster when you look at it. If I can somehow get Walker on the comeback, I would love it. Doubt I will, but that's where I'm at there. So again, appreciate all you guys out here firing it out. And yeah, shoot in your questions, guys. We got a bunch of you watching. Shoot in your questions for your thoughts and your comments where people are looking at, because I can talk monologue style all day long, as you guys know, but part of being on Local Football Flavors actually get the interaction and to go back and forth more so than just having me hate on all the various picks of the people around me in the draft. So in general, I'm really against taking the tight ends this high in this draft. There's so many good mid-tier tight ends that we haven't seen in quite a while. One of the ones I bring up a lot is Warren out of Penn State. That guy pretty much didn't let them throw to receivers. And it's not like Penn State is like Indiana, where they only have one player. I might have meant that as Indiana 2 years ago, but you guys get what I mean. Penn State has talent up and down it, and Warren was so dominant that they didn't give the ball to anyone else. I really think he's the Bowers of this year. So Warren is a guy that I put on my rosters a lot. Bob gives me a little bit of hate for it. Certainly not going to be happening in this pick, but will happen in the next turn. All go around. One of the guys that I really do love is Trayvon Henderson. And if I can get Henderson and Walker on this turn, it would be the coup of the century. I don't think I'm getting both. But the reason I like Trayvon so much is he has that ability of being breakaway speed. But more importantly, the NFL is going to draft him in the first and second round. And any player that gets taken that early pays out. I mean, it's just the way that it is. You look at all of the best running backs in football. They're all basically first or second rounds in the actual NFL draft. And Trayvon Henderson is certainly going to be in that department as well. Ayuk is one of these guys that I have really mixed feelings about, because I was so in love with him last year. I was so in love with both of the Niners receivers. He gets that injury after essentially an offseason where he was non-existent. So the question is, will he come around and be the Ayuk that he was? And quite frankly, I'm not totally sure that he will or not. So it's one of those situations where, I really need to think about it, because I think I like Ayuk still, but I'm not totally sure that I want to have Ayuk at the same time, if that makes sense. So given the fact that Henderson just went, my next pick's going to be Judkins. Judkins also going to go in the top 2 rounds of the NFL draft. He's going to be a second rounder. It's going to be great. Again, anytime you get a second round running back, you do it. So for the next pick here, I'm going to be throwing another receiver on the board. Right now, I'm only having 3 on the roster, and now having 3 running backs. This is the time where I'm going to do that, and then probably scoop up Warren on the comeback. So the receiver that in this space, looking at the receivers, it's Debo McMillan, Juan Jennings, Edebuke, and Myers. I'm going to be going Jalen McMillan. He's already been groomed to be the replacement here. He is certainly what I think will be the next one up, especially after Godwin leaves. I see him having a Godwin-esque season. That being said, guys, I need to break down a conversation Bob and I had about Tyrone Tracy. I don't think there is a pathway for Tyrone Tracy to truly be successful. Mostly because I don't think there's a pathway for the Giants to be successful, and he's part of this. The Giants are another team that has so many holes all over the place. Where are you going to start in fixing it? And running back is normally going to be one of the last departments. But given the free agency world and this draft class, you're going to be able to pick one up for basically nothing. And the Giants have already shown that Tracy kind of lost his spot to Singletary at the end. And even if you get a B-level running back free agent, it's going to be better than Singletary. So, for instance, if Tony Pollard were cut, he'd be instantly the number 1 on the Giants. And there's going to be a lot of that running back shifting around this year. And I really think that the Giants probably sign a starter at the running back position. And I see Tracy essentially becoming a wasted pick. And for that guy in the 1 seed, for him to be his first running back off the board, it's a really vulnerable position that he put himself in. So Some of the other guys that are currently next up in terms of the ADP at the moment right now are Shakir and Myers. Shakir is one of these enigmas that, sure, he gets volume, but what does he do with it? And in a half PPR, he's so much more worthless than Parasol, for example. Parasol, I think, is a guy who, as a seventh rounder, is an absolute great value. He fits perfectly into that Debo role. That's going to be a better offense this year. And he's basically primed in the same way that McMillan is. Just flat out, I like Baker Mayfield more than I like Purdy, and that's why I went with McMillan. But Pearsall, I think, is of all these running backs that went here in the seventh round, I have him ranked as second. It would go McMillan and Pearsall in that department. Another guy that just got drafted here, who I think is prime for a setback, is Bo Nix. When you watch Denver's tape last year, Bo was really in a spot where he had a great step up as a rookie, but he just screams come back to earth candidate. And Godwin is not leaving. Rice is out most of the season. So I got to completely disagree with you there, man. If Godwin stays, that would be a shock to me. Rice isn't going to be out for most of the season because Kansas City has the ability to manipulate the suspension. They already know he's going to be hurt for the first couple of weeks. And his suspension, as long as he's active, counts. So all they have to do is keep him on the active roster. And then next thing you know, when he was hurt, he's also just suspended at the same time. It's really a no skin off their back situation, and they get the best of all worlds. It's in some ways, it's not really a punishment in this regard, except for the fact, I mean, he's obviously losing money, but it's not really a punishment to Kansas City because of the way that they're able to manipulate this situation. So Rice is not going to be out most of the season. Rice is going to be out for September. And that's fine. As my number 3 receiver on this team, knowing that I'm going to get what probably is the number 1 guy on Kansas City next year, I'll take that all day. We saw with Kansas City's offense the other night when their receivers didn't get open, period. That's why he kept getting sacked constantly. If there's no one to throw the ball to, there's no one to throw the ball to. And that was the reality of the other night. And when I look and see the future here, I really do think that looking at Rice as being the number 1 there isn't that unfeasible. Him and Worthy are the really only 2 viable offensive skill positions on that team. And now that we're getting into the 9th and 10th rounds of any best ball league, it's always good to start taking your guys that are your big time shot guys. I believe that you use the beginning of any best ball league to get your firm foundation running backs. It's the exact opposite as this guy next to me is leaning in here. But he to me is a guy who could absolutely, I mean, we saw it. He'd beat great numbers at the end of the first quarter, and then they'd stop throwing him the ball. Thanks a lot, Carr. But the reality is that in terms of best ball, when he gives you those big one-off weeks, it's absolutely studly and great. So, and I can see your point that maybe Godwin will stay in Tampa as Tampa signs him as a let's have a forever legacy. But I have to say this, more so than most players, I'm not in the total camp that Godwin's going to return to being Godwin. They drafted McMillan to replace Godwin. That was what they did. And
new setup.
Coming back and being the stud he was at the beginning of the year. The beginning of his year was the start of a contract season. And there are guys that just go all out in a contract season. So even if he is back, I still see a role for McMillan and still a guy I want to have. Bob, welcome to the party. We're here in the 2 spot. Let me give you a little quick breakdown of where this draft has gone. God knows I love him. Bijan, Bucky, Higgins, Metcalf, Rishi, Judkins, Warren, and then my boy Shaheed. You've been caught up as far as our roster so far.
So, 5th round for Rice. I'm okay with something like that. I'm not, like I said last episode, I am not like a true fan right now of the price of Rashee Rice. I do think that when we get more information about him, he's going to keep dropping a little bit more. Um, when I look at it, I might have rather have had Chris Olave there. Um, maybe.
Yeah, I get the debate. But the part of the reason I went with, well, first off, I wouldn't have taken Shaheed had I had Olave. I like having Shaheed at the price.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. Um, I'm not sure how I feel about Olave either, though. You know what I mean? Like, he's been hurt a lot.
Yeah.
It seems like everyone in New Orleans is hurt, and New Orleans is in cap hell. So
Well,
they're
one
going
of
to be
the
jettisoning away linemen, not acquiring
yeah,
them.
well, one of the biggest problems, to your point though, about New Orleans for the last several years has been the quality of their line and the
Mm-hmm.
injury problems that line has had. For anybody that watches the NFC South, I mean, like you could. One year they were a veritable who's who of who was starting on the offensive line at any one point in time in the season. And the one reason Kamara worked so well for so many years is that he was capable of making plays even when coverages and stuff broke down. He was able to get in there and move around and get on the outside. And the reason it worked for so long for New Orleans too was also because they had the consistency of a guy like Drew Brees. Once they had to transition from different quarterbacks, and even Derek Carr, Derek Carr is not a bad player by any stretch of the imagination, but the things that he does well, he does need time for them to develop because he does actually have a good arm, but because the line has been so shitty the last 2 years, he's gotten a reputation for being a dink and dunk kind of guy, but that's not really kind of his MO. And it's only his MO because the line has been garbage. So, you look at it and you need time for plays to develop. And one of the things we said about Chris Olave earlier in the season, if you were with us earlier in the season, was the fact that Chris Olave wasn't really being used in important situations, and Chris Olave was only being used like it basically in weird ways, right? But I still think just talking about Chris Olave is really important because in the 5th round, he's worth it. Like last year, the reason we weren't on Chris Olave at all last year was because you had to take him in the 2nd round. And Chris Olave in the 2nd round is terrible value. But Chris Olave in the 5th round, in that same conversation as Rashee Rice, in the same conversation as a Chris Godwin, I am okay taking the chance because he does have, just like Rashee Rice, he does have 1,000-yard upside. And in the 5th round, that's kind of what you're aiming for. You're kind of aiming for a wide receiver that could maybe get you a couple of games over 15 points in a given week. Nothing too special. And hopefully by the end of the season, they end up somewhere in that 800 to 1,100 yard discussion between 6 and 8 touchdowns, somewhere in there. That's kind of what you're looking for there. So I think Rashid Shaheed's an interesting option too, because at the beginning of the year, just speaking about wide receivers for the Saints, one of the things about Shaheed that worked out so well was the thing that I was talking about with Carr, and it was one of the reasons why Valdez Scantling worked out so well as well. With Valdez Scantling working out at the end of the year, with coverages and stuff, where they were beating those single high coverages that they were dropping in there, and 2 high coverages at a pretty good rate. So, I really like the potential of the Saints wide receivers this year. I'm just curious who the quarterback will be and what they're going to do to get out of cap hell, because it seems like they always push the pony down the road later and later every single year. So I assume you didn't want to take Travis Hunter there?
No, I was trying to take Leggett. It just didn't go through. I had like an internet blurb and didn't go through. Yeah, but Travis Hunter was my 3rd pick for the thing. So Hunter and Leggett, really, I'm okay with it.
Yeah,
Travis Hunter is my 6th receiver at this point.
Yeah. How do you guys feel about Travis Hunter? Because I got some thoughts about Travis Hunter, but I want to see. Type it in the chat if you guys have a particular feeling about Travis Hunter. I think in the 11th round, 11th, 12th round, I'm okay with that. Yeah, dude. I know you're liking.
But
I know
we
you're
totally
liking.
blunt though. The pick I was going to take was Scadaboo, because I'm
You're gonna
starting to
take
think that
Scadaboo.
he'd become the next Monty.
The next
I would
Monty.
have. For no reason, other reason. I love yelling Scadaboo.
I mean, there is a point at.
Well, he's not going to be. He's not going to be Najee.
There is certain points in a draft where sometimes the name is just so fun you got to take the guy. And I think that Cam Scadaboo is at that point in time in most people's. He's been quietly climbing up most people's boards as well. You know, to see a guy like Rico Dowdle to as low as he's going right now is interesting because it does paint the picture that a lot of people think that Rico isn't going to have a role next year on the Cowboys or as significant a role as he might have had this year.
Had a role last year.
You know, you see a guy like Trevor Lawrence go. I mean, I'm not a fan of the Bo, Dak, Trevor pick unless that guy took CeeDee Lamb and Brian Thomas Jr. It just doesn't track, just doesn't make sense there. Quarterbacks are starting to run thin. So, you know, for everybody that watched our video a couple weeks ago about quarterbacks and taking late quarterbacks look like they're starting to climb up the board in some drafts.
They are.
People are getting scared. Where you could take Michael Penix at a couple weeks ago, it's not the value anymore. Unfortunately, a lot of people are climbing, and just not a lot of excellent talent is necessarily
falling. It's making the people that were in the 10th round drop to the. It's just switching the rounds in general.
Mm-hmm. It's just it's a little weird to see.
The part to me is this dead tier of tight ends is now climbing. Like, who wants to have Ferguson or Kincaid at this point? Like, I don't. I mean, get it.
Fergie.
Why have 3 quarterbacks on your team?
Fergie isn't awful
at this point,
but I'm also not a fan of going with basically some players that I consider to be dead value players. One of those players that I consider to be a dead value player is DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift is one of those players that may not have a significant role on his team next year. Another dead value player for me is Jared Goff. Jared Goff in the 9th round really doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, you're going to go back in the stat sheet, everybody, and you're going to take a look at
Hey, real quick, what's the breakdown on Isaiah Bond? I am yet to see a write-up on him because I haven't really looked into receivers yet.
I've seen some people really high on him. I'd be willing to take a chance on the rook.
All right.
You know, you look at it and Jared Goff, when you look at a guy like Jared Goff.
Oh, screw it. There he goes. All right. I have liked Ollie Gordon in the past.
Take him.
Him or Dylan Sampson. Take one of those 2 rooks. We'll go Ali.
But back to Goff. The reason I think Goff is such a dead value in comparison to the other quarterbacks around him is that the weeks that Jared Goff went ham were the weeks that he's either 4 or 5 touchdowns or had like a bonus receiving touchdown or maybe a rushing touchdown. He's not really a rushing quarterback, but usually speaking, he kind of his value in the 9th round comparatively to the players that you can get in that round versus the quarterbacks that you can get a round or 2 later is not really so consequential. While Jared Goff might consistently hit 15 points or so, 15 points out of your quarterback isn't necessarily what you want. It's definitely not what you want. So if I can buy in and get a guy like Bateman or Keenan Allen, and then a round later or 2 rounds later get my quarterback, I'm absolutely okay with that. And I think that that's something that people probably will take a look at as we move forward with these drafts. And is that Jared Goff's value in the 9th round just seems wrong. It seems off. But as these other quarterbacks are climbing and as the rounds kind of just switch themselves up, it's not as glaring as it was a couple of weeks ago.
That part is true. But one of the other things you got to remember with drafting or Underdog in particular is they don't do the bonus points. It's just straight half PPR. So it's even more of a point what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a guy like Jared Goff without the 300-point bonuses or, that DraftKings provides, I just am not a huge fan of Goff there when when you look at the quarterbacks that have come after him, and Jordan Love, Dak Prescott, C.J. Stroud, Drake May, they all have similar-ish floors, and they all have similar ceilings. You might say, oh, well, I want a quarterback on a good offense. I totally agree with that. But when you look at how the Texans can improve this year, there's a very good chance that C.J. Stroud could match similar weeks. When you look at Dak Prescott, an injury-laden season last year, didn't look like he played well. We know that Dak Prescott does have the potential to be a number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 ranked quarterback on the year. And if you go back to 2023, he did have a couple of those 30-point spike weeks, which would have helped you out in a tournament setting or in best ball like this as well. And don't forget about Michael Penix. I mean, Michael Penix didn't have a great rookie campaign, but you can see the potential out of Penix. You go in and you look at the stats.
Oh, you definitely can. I mean, that guy can ball.
And his stat sheet, to me, very much is a potential mirror to a stat sheet of a guy like Jared Goff. While I love Jared Goff more, and I think that Jared Goff is a great quarterback in my estimation in terms of just what he can do on the field. When you look at a guy like Penix, you say to yourself, okay, well, what's his situation like? Atlanta seems to have a really good offensive line. Atlanta has a good running game. Atlanta has 2 wide receivers that complement each other really well. The one thing Atlanta doesn't have is a tight end who's catching the ball consistently. What does Atlanta have as well? A defense that plays very similar to a defense like Detroit. They might give up a lot of points. They might play well some games and whatnot. If you look at the disparity, I can take Jared Goff in the 9th or Penix in the 12th. I'm willing to roll the dice. I mean, comparatively speaking, I am willing to roll the dice on a guy like Penix instead of Goff. So just like putting that into perspective, that's kind of a comp that I have fantasy-wise. Well, he didn't show it this year and didn't get over 2 touchdowns or whatnot. There is a potential for that to improve in the coming year for Atlanta. And it's something to be excited about if you're an Atlanta fan for sure. And especially when you look at it, Tua. Yeah, Tua might not play every single game, but does he have a ceiling like Goff? Sure. Bryce Young, looked like a turd at the beginning of the season, turned it on at the end of the season, had a couple 20-plus point games, 25-plus point games. Getting that in the 12th round, I think is better. And I think sometimes like Jared Goff is the click for most people in the 9th round because they're like, where's the value at? I'd rather take a skill position in the 9th over Jared Goff when I see quarterbacks of similar capacity as him later on. I would have loved.
It's 100% right. I mean, this is the argument back to where we're at. 10th round quarterbacks, man, and it makes it strong. So we look prior to the 10th round. We only had 1 non-running back or receiver.
Let's see it. Go up.
I mean, and for us, it's the one who I believe is going to be the rookie of the year, in terms of offensive rookie of the year. So that's why I keep taking him. But you look at it, your first 6 picks, 3 running backs.
No, let's not even talk about that. Joe,
balance. And by the way, getting
Judkins
a little bit later than normal. By the way,
let's just look at this board.
Getting him at 6.
Let's look at this board in totality, and let's look. We did this experiment. I just want to look at the first 6 quarterbacks taken off the board. Okay, we did this last week, but I just want to, for anybody joining us today, I just want to mention this right now. If you're not getting
number 6 is Mahomes.
Yeah, if you're not getting Lamar or Allen or Daniels or Hurts, there is no reason to take another quarterback in the next 5 rounds. Because while I love Joe Burrow, and you will not hear me talk
You're 100% right.
You will not hear me talk ill about Joe Burrow. But there is a reason. If you take Chase, yeah, sure, take Joe Burrow, fine. But I want you to think about the value you're potentially missing out on here, because you're looking at the difference between, let's say, Garrett Wilson, then Devontae Adams, Ted McMillan, Calvin Ridley, and then who did they take in the 10th round? Let's see, like 9th, 10th round. Scroll down a little bit. Versus Etienne Robinson, okay, but had you taken, let's say that person would have taken Herbie or Kyler or Love or something of that nature, the amount of points you're potentially missing out on with Joe Burrow versus one of those guys is not completely catastrophic, because it's not a guarantee that next season that Joe Burrow's points come from having phenomenal passing games. While Joe Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks to be capable of doing that, where is the likelihood that the Bengals are going to consistently throw for 4 or 5 touchdowns if they don't sign back T. Higgins, if they go out and get a running back? Where's the potential at? Because you didn't see excessive numbers like that when Joe Mixon was running in some touchdowns as well. So there's a problem with taking a guy like Joe Burrow in the 4th round, whereas the problem with Daniels is can he keep up the consistency at the level that he was doing it? And when it comes to Josh Allen and Lamar, you know what you're getting out of those guys. You know they can throw up a 15, 12, 9-point game like they did this year, but they also are 2 of the only quarterbacks to be capable of pinging you plus 40. And in order for them to do that, they're not going to need to throw 4 or 5 touchdowns to do that. They can do that with their legs. But a guy like Mahomes, or not Mahomes, but a guy like Goff, a guy like Jordan Love, a guy like Dak, they're going to need to throw 4 or 5 touchdowns in a game. So you have, if you're buying into one of those quarterbacks, and this goes to the theory of stacking. If I'm buying into Jared Goff and I'm buying into Dak and I'm buying into Jordan Love, then I'm also buying into their wide receiver room. So the Jordan Love owner took Jayden Reed. I'd probably also take another one, because it's very clear that Jayden Reed is not the guy they want to throw to when it matters the most.
Become this point. We had a conversation about Reed, that he's actually a guy we're starting to take off our boards.
If I'm taking Caleb Williams, I'm taking DJ Moore, and I'm taking Roma Dunze. I'm not fiddling around. I'm not screwing up. I'm not taking anybody else. If I believe that Caleb Williams, and this is all a belief perspective, if I believe a quarterback like Caleb Williams is capable of getting me to 26, 28, 30 points a week, then I'm going to take the wide receivers that are there in DJ Moore and Roma Dunze. There's no question in my mind that that's what I'm doing. If I'm taking CJ Stroud, to my point, which is one of the issues with taking a guy like CJ Stroud, if you're taking CJ Stroud, Joe didn't do this, but if you are taking CJ Stroud, then you also want to take Nico. You absolutely want to take Nico.
I'd rather beach on the Nico, because
right. But I'm saying if you have, and this is to say that if you're drafting Bijan, there's a very good likelihood that you also are not drafting CJ Stroud, but that could be a potential advantage for you in the long game, that if CJ Stroud ends up doing well and Bijan ends up doing well, you'll probably be in a good situation. But what I don't want to do, let's look at Trevor, for example. Go up to that drafters first and second round pick. I want to see it from him, because I wasn't here for the beginning of the draft. Can you go up all the way? Okay. So they took Brian Thomas Jr. So Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr., that makes sense. However, the problem with Trevor is that the guy hasn't, I mean, I could be wrong in assuming this, but I feel like Trevor Lawrence has not had more than maybe three touchdown games in his career. I could be misspeaking on that. I'm not going to check the stats right now, but I definitely feel that there has been only at least maybe 1 4-touchdown game in his career. So pairing up Trevor Lawrence with Brian Thomas Jr., I would at least want to get another wide receiver that I think would be on the Jaguars. But again, that's a law of diminishing returns there, because if the quarterback doesn't have the chance to get above that, you kind of, and if you're taking him as your 3rd quarterback, then you don't think that. If you thought that, then you would be taking Trevor maybe a little bit higher, or you wouldn't be taking 3 quarterbacks if you believed in Trevor so much. And this does speak to why Joe almost always consistently takes a guy like Justin Fields. Justin Fields' value in the 12th round, even though we're not pairing him with George Pickens. So, taking that stack out of it, Justin Fields does not have to have or George Pickens does not have to have a great game for Justin Fields to be successful. And to get that type of value in the 12th round, if the Steelers take Justin Fields. Similarly, if Justin Fields were to go to the Raiders or something like that, he doesn't necessarily have to have a number one alpha wide receiver, but a guy like Goff does. A guy like Jordan Love you need to have a couple of those wide receivers in that room in order for that belief system. Because why take him if you didn't believe in the rest of the team? That's more across the line of what I'm saying. So, that's kind of the theory there in stacking some of these. You can scroll down, Joe, in stacking some of these more traditional passing quarterbacks, and why potentially Joe Burrow in the 4th round could be good for you and could be poison for you, because you're setting yourself up. You're setting yourself up for potential failure there. If this is Chip Kelly and Fields, I like that. I'm a big fan of, I think for Justin Fields to be super successful, that the Steelers, in a way, I'm a Steelers fan, Joe's a Steelers fan. The Steelers are an organization that over the last 5-6 years has not been exciting. I mean, there's nothing exciting attached to the Steelers organization right now. And while there have been good players that have come through the pipeline through the Steelers organization, for fantasy purposes, you haven't really been excited about a Steelers player to own them since Antonio Brown's, heyday.
Antonio Brown was prime Hall of Fame when he was
that's
here.
What I'm saying. You haven't been excited to own a player from the Steelers. Like every year, Najee, okay, I'll take him. Like 1 year, he was a first, second rounder, and you're like, I'll take him. He did it good, and you're like, okay. And then all of a sudden, he starts falling off. So what I'm sharing more so is I think that
what the Steelers lack is explosiveness, is what you're trying to say, because Najee could accumulate. He just
the Steelers lack explosiveness, and when you have an explosive player like Justin Fields, you need players that complement him well. And I truly, outside of the one game that he played well against the Colts, they ended up not being they were not doing good at the beginning of the game, but they ended up pulling it together in the 3rd and 4th quarter. I don't think Fields is a great fit for the Steelers organization. They're not exciting. They refuse to use the best qualities of their offensive weapons consistently.
Yes, and they spread it way too thin across too many guys. And that really couldn't even be in the NFL.
I know that I've talked smack on George Pickens last week, and I just want to talk about him maybe in a better way again, is that, Diva does drop. Joe mentioned about the penalty yards and stuff. I'm not taking George Pickens this year. But George Pickens is one of those players that, when you have a talent like George Pickens, but yet you consistently want to use Ben Skronik, or you want to use Calvin Austin Jr., or you go out and you get Mike
Williams. Who the hell
took
Tootin? That's my guy.
You go out and you get Mike Williams and you only use him for 7 plays, and Mike Williams can be an explosive player. That's an organization thing in my mind. And, a guy like Justin Fields, to your point, Ant, could benefit from having a coach that plays into the explosiveness of his players. And if I can have Justin Fields in the 12th round and avoid Jared Goff in the 9th and avoid Caleb Williams in the 9th and don't have to pay up for Bo Nix, I'd do it. Absolutely. Aaron Rodgers, I think that's a wasted pick. Personally, even if he does play, I don't see anything there. I mean, he's not going to be back in New York.
That guy also has one of the elite ones. That's just a throw in and hope you don't have bye lineups.
And that would be the most toxic thing the Steelers could do to their fan base.
In fact, actually, Bob, the whole bye thing is why I'm considering taking quarterback in this pick, because I only have 2. And what if they line up for a bye? Do I really want to lose?
Yeah,
do I really want to lose because of that, or do I want Trevor Etienne? I think I just take a fill on quarterback for bye protection.
Yeah, I think you should.
Yeah.
I in these early
For the record,
ones,
there are no fun ones left in the last round.
in these early ones, I am recommending that if you're doing one of these early tournaments, the big board, the little board, the war room, that I would definitely take 3 quarterbacks.
We need to. Yeah.
They don't have to necessarily be super sexy, but I could see myself and I could see Joe that when Best Ball Mania starts, that we're going to go probably pare down to 2 quarterbacks on certain teams.
Oh, yeah. Once we know what the schedule is and we don't need to worry about it. Absolutely.
I could definitely see myself in Best Ball Mania paying up for the Lamars and the Jane Daniels a little bit more consistently. But right now,
I'll still be riding Fields.
Right now, I am willing to just sit in this 10, 11, 12 zone and draft in there. Joe, do we have time to rack up another one?
No, we don't, because they take about an hour. So here's a breakdown of what that roster was. It was Stroud, Fields, Wilson, Bijan, Bucky, Judkins,
Hey,
Gordon,
that, man.
Mason Giddens.
What was the payout on that?
On what?
No, Ant plays 439 in Best Ball Mania. Love it.
Gotcha. And then our receivers are Higgins, Metcalf, Rishi Rice, Jalen McMillian, Shaheed, Hunter, Amora, and Robinson from the Rams, hoping he gets that step in. Your receiver, your tight ends are Warren, Gesicki, and Stinnett.
All right, go up a little bit. I just want to check out the rest of this draft board so we could talk through a couple of things that we noticed about what people are doing recently. So
where do you want to start at?
Up. Yeah, go all the way up. So one of the things, and this goes, oh man, and that's solid, man. I love that. I hate when with the best ball tournaments that just happened. So the playoff best ball, it sucked because the key players. So I was sitting there with AJ Brown, Kelsey, and a couple other guys that we talked about. And the cog in the system that I was missing for that team was Devonta Smith. And I had him on another team, but I was missing a player from that. I mean, everybody got paid out when you made it to the final one in the best ball tournament. But it was just so frustrating to watch. I had Xavier Worthy. I had it all. It was just frustrating. I just dug myself into a hole not having Devonta Smith, but I had all the other pieces, and Kelsey shit the bed. Pacheco, as always, shits the bed. You know which guy is on my do not draft list, and it should be on your do not draft list too? It's Isaiah Pacheco.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't think he's in the league next year, or Chiefs, certainly not as a starting capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I might take him if he falls to like the 10th round, 11th round, but he's off. I mean, he's off my board. But the one thing I want to point out here is tight ends. I just want to talk about tight ends before we talk about the other wide receivers and running backs in this room. Is that you're going to see those 4 names: Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, George Kittle, and Sam Laporta up top most of the time. Yeah, it was way condensed, and you saw. And just as an aside, Joe, there was one, and then the next break was, I think, 22 or 23, and there was a couple people there. Then 36, and then 55.
I mean, people all having the same lineup they're submitting.
87. There were some variations in the lineup, but the team, I think that if you wanted to win the whole thing just to take away the payment yourself as number one, you needed Hurts, you needed Barkley, you needed Devonta, you needed Xavier Worthy, you needed
a flex,
you needed Kelsey, and then your flex.
Well, that was the roster. That would have been a full roster.
No. You needed
DraftKings requires the tight ends. Underdog didn't.
Yeah, I'm saying in DraftKings. This was in DraftKings. And then you would have needed either AJ Brown or DeAndre Hopkins. And DeAndre Hopkins had 11 points. AJ Brown had 13 points. But getting AJ Brown wasn't realistic if you were having the other guys. Because the rounds didn't line up. So you would the best possible lineup, I believe, was Hurts, Barkley, Devonta Smith, Xavier Worthy, Kelsey, and DeAndre Hopkins. And my one lineup had all those players but Devonta Smith, which was so frustrating to see. But back to the thought here. When you look at the 4 tight ends that are going to be taken, in order to, and I'm just going to say this, and it's going to sound a little bit controversial, but I am out on Brock Bowers at value here. And there's a couple reasons why. But one of the main reasons why is when we were talking with family this past week and we're talking with Ant, there's a nice zone of tight ends that can give you a decent enough production to have a tight end that's top 8 in the week, top 10 in the week. Brock Bowers, for me, has the potential to be absolutely standout, super electric player, capable of 20 plus points in a given week. But I'm not giving up that value in the second round. When I'm staring right there at a guy like George Kittle or Sam Laporta in the 5th or 6th round, if I want to take them there, particularly
basically here's your trade-off. Would you rather have George Kittle and JT or Bowers and a rookie? I mean, that's really your question here, because Kittle and Bowers aren't that far apart. This is not like Kelsey 5 years ago where it was guaranteed he won by a mile. Yeah. These guys are all producing so much less than their peers. And you guys know I hate on DJ Moore, probably more than I should, but he's going to score 100 more points than Brock Bowers. Like, those two should not be next to each other.
And one of the things I just want to mention about Brock, and this is nothing against his skill set, but when you look at what could potentially happen here for the Raiders, is that there's a change in personnel. There's going to be a change in quarterback. There's going to be a change in the skill position.
Can I call timeout on Brock Bowers? Has Old Man Carroll ever made a quality tight end?
I think there's been some good fantasy tight end seasons from him.
We'll look into that.
Jimmy Graham?
I don't think there is.
Jimmy Graham? Pete Carroll was there when Jimmy Graham was there. Jimmy Graham had standouts.
Jimmy Graham was only good in New Orleans.
No, Jimmy Graham had a standout season in Seattle, I believe. Well, I'll have to look at that. But
we'll look into that.
But back to the point is that this one-off position of tight end is not a priority. If you're taking a tight end in the first 6 rounds, this is what I want to tell you. If you are taking a tight end in the first 6 rounds, you believe that tight end can consistently score in a half PPR league 16 plus points a week.
That ain't happening.
And has the potential
that ain't happening.
To go.
I mean, so realistically, let's go 16 points. So to get to a floor of 16 in a half PPR league, you have to have 60 yards, a touchdown. That only gets you to 12. Now you need to have 8 catches to get the other way. That's not an easy task for a tight end. 8 catches, 60, and a touchdown. It's rare.
Let me pull this up because I think this is going to be
really rare.
I think this is going to be an important point to make. I just want to pull this up. There's a chart that I saw.
DJ Moore can do that.
About. Okay, hold on. Let me see here. All right. So this chart comes from Ryan Heath, who gives content out on Fantasy Points. This comes from his Twitter. And this is an experiment that we did previously in the last season. Just talking a little bit about transitioning from tight ends to running backs for a moment, because I just want to talk to you about like points distribution. If you check this out from him, he posted it January 27th, 2025. And it lists the running back 1 fantasy points per game all the way down to the running back 20 fantasy points per game. If you want to do this yourself, it's very easy to do. You go into Fantasy Pros, you make your spreadsheet, and you grab all of the data and you can track it and organize your chart that way. It's very easy to get the data. Okay. But this is summarized really well. In 2020, let me look here. This is posted from 2012 to 2024. Okay. The number one running back in 2023 averaged 24.1 fantasy points per game. Okay. So that's kind of the mark that you're looking for when you're looking for, should I take a tight end in the first 2 or 3 rounds? Is that tight end capable of averaging 24 points a game? Okay, maybe not. This is the reason why I'm saying this. This is very important. Then you come down and you look at the running back 7 on the year. Last year, the running back 7 averaged 17 fantasy points per game in PPR scoring. This is PPR scoring, by the way. Okay. PPR. So take this for all you need to as a half PPR, right? 17 points per game on average this year, running back 7. Going down, running back 20 this year, 14 points per game on average. This is why you hear me saying the number 15 a lot. I did the math already on this because we've been doing this for some time. But this chart puts it into a nice, easy to read format. You look at it and you say, okay, from running back 9 on, 17 through 14 points. Back in 2015, that number was around 12. Back in 2023, the 9th best running back was sitting at 15 points, and the disparity between the 20th ranked running backs was around 1 point. Okay. So why I say this is this. Those running backs that you have on that board, the JTs, yeah, I agree with you, Ant. You absolutely do. But one of the things that the reason why I bring this up that I want to mention is that when you're when you're looking at the tight end, especially going into this upcoming season where there's been so much kind of disparity in the tight end market, I want to point out that if you're taking a tight end this high, that you will want him to average 15, 17 points a game. Now, Brock Bowers is purely capable of doing that. Trey McBride is absolutely capable of doing that. George Kittle and Sam Laporta absolutely capable of doing that as well. That's average, and you can think about floors as well. But I just want to ask you.
Well, and I do want to point this out here. You need an elite tight end, sure. But what Bob's saying is that you're going to be able to find one of the top 5 ends, probably 3 of the top 5 ends after the 8th round. And that's the whole point here. Because if you look at it, tight ends are more likely to bust because of all the reasons Bob's bringing out here. And we saw that the capability is there. So trying to get the elite tight end is still only in the mid-20s of receivers on a week-to-week basis. So where the value is getting the right guys late in mid-tier. That's why, like I said, my guy right now in that entire line of thinking is Warren from Penn State. That's the dude.
This is another fun chart, also coming from Ryan Heath, from posted January 29th, 2025. If you take out Travis Kelce and Rob Gronkowski, this is his tweet. You go back to the 2017 year, the number 1 tight end. We'll just do the whole thing. So if you take out Kelce and you take out that, the top scoring tight end, 15.8 points, or 14.5 points back in 2017, 2020 and 2021, you're looking at 17 points apiece as the number 1 tight end. Can you take a guess, Joe, the scoring for the number 3 tight end?
Oh, it's probably like 14.
In 2021.
It's probably like,
12.
In 2021?
12.
Yeah, all right, so here you go.
You go in and you look at this season, just this season, 2024. The top 3 tight ends on average, tight end 1, tight end 2, tight end 3, were above 15 points. Tight end 4, tight end 5, tight end 6, 13, 12, 12, tight end 10, 10. This goes back to what I was talking about
which is
earlier in the season.
Bob. All of that is valid, but to Ant's point here, which you just took down, is that it's not a problem that tight ends had setbacks. It's actually an indictment as far as what's in the league. Overall, in the NFL, what you have is a lot of combinations that are leading to tight ends being less productive. The first is that overall, the defensive lines are better than offensive lines, and tight ends are staying in to protect much more than they did 3 years ago, as Bob was pointing out those stats. Running backs with the outliner year is mostly because Saquon and Henry finally got behind running games that worked. So I don't see that being an outliner moving forward. You know, the majority of these backs, especially with the influx of talent entering the league, is not going to set back. Now, you can make the argument that improves the supply, so therefore the demand for all should drop. I can understand that economic fight. But my point is that the ability to project who the number one running back's going to be and have, if you're wrong, have them still produce is much safer bet than going at who you think the top tight end is going to be and have them fall off. So many people took Laporta and he just fell off the face of the earth and kept you from winning. So like, unless you had Kelsey, the other top 3 or 5 tight ends last year didn't produce. Maybe McBride did. But the point is, Bowers wasn't a top 5 tight end last year. He is now, but he wasn't then. And I feel Bowers is going to have a lot of Laporta's issues in terms of the setback, not just because of him getting more on tape, but also because at the end of the day, they can't give him the ball more than they did last year. They can't. And Pete Carroll was notorious for running lower play averages than anyone else.
So
the Raiders are in trouble fantasy-wise.
That was just looking at that chart. And we're going to take I'm going to look at a half PPR because Underdog is half PPR.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this comes from, we're going to look at 20, just going back here. This comes from Fantasy Pros. It's 2023's numbers, which match up to the numbers that we have. There's only along the points spread is a little bit different. But going back to 2023, where Ryan posted in his chart, if you take out, Kelsey or Gronkowski from 2012 on, 2023, the top tight end was 14.6 points on average, 14.1 number 2, and the 6th tight end was 12.6. Okay, which is 2-point differential. And those are good enough numbers. But when you look at it and you say, okay, Travis Kelce sitting there and Hawkinson back in 2023 at 14.6 on average. Laporta, 14 points on average. Ingram, 13. Andrews, 13. Kittle, 12. Njoku, 12. Okay. I come in and I look at, let's say I look at the wide receiver market. Okay. If I'm buying in a wide receiver, I don't get in, at least this goes back to 2023. So you can just go in and we can do this experiment as well. If I want to find a 12.5 average from the wide receiver grouping, I've got to look all the way down to wide receiver number 26. Okay. So the point I'm trying to make, I'm not saying, and what I said about Brock Bowers, what Joe said about Brock Bowers blocking is I'm on your side about Brock Bowers here. And I think they're going to use him more as a pass catcher in the coming year.
They might, but his situation with Laporta isn't different. We'll dive into that.
But I don't want to give up in terms of if I'm buying into Brock Bowers, I'm also going to definitely buy into. If I'm buying him heavy, right? And I agree with you. You do need to separate, and you do need to get final weeks for the playoff push. And I agree with you for Best Ball Mania. That is what we're going to look into. But when it comes from the big boards, little boards, not knowing the schedule yet, I think that there's a poison pill you're taking by taking a guy like Bowers and taking a guy like McBride. Laporta is the 4th option.
To your point, Ant, Laporta was the 4th option last year. That's part's not different. But Laporta and Bowers are both in the same spot of Bowers entering this offseason where Laporta was last year. There's not a spot for Bowers to tangibly improve. You cannot give him the ball at a higher clip than he was given last year. You then add the fact, all right, we can make the argument.
I made the Sam Laporta argument last year too.
Yeah, this is Bob's argument, but you can make the argument, well, maybe the Raiders won't suck as much and they'll have more first downs, so therefore they'll play more plays. From an outside perspective, you can go with that, but the problem is that Pete Carroll runs the least amount of offensive plays in the league, and he's always been that way. So he believes in lower play volume, which leads to lower tight ends overall. So yeah, you might say you're going to be able to get more touchdowns unless they add an offensive weapon, because there's no guarantee they don't do that. And they need to incredibly. The Raiders are a team that needs everything. You don't get to draft this high if you don't. But the problem is that you can't guarantee they're not going to get a quality skill position to add to that room that's also going to pull him back. Caleb, welcome here. We'll jump to your question in a minute.
Caleb's question. To this point, if Brock Bowers, I do think Brock Bowers will get more touchdowns this year. I do think that Brock Bowers will somehow land at around 7, maybe 8 touchdowns. But to the point that we made about Sam Laporta this past year is that depending on game script here, depending on how the flow, and depends on how they're able to move the ball down the field. Again, this goes into, your belief about Brock Bowers in general and any tight end if you're taking a one-off position that early. If you believe the situation is going to drastically improve, so let's say bringing in Carroll, bringing in an offense and bringing in these skill position players, it's going to better their chances to move the ball down the field. I don't disagree with that. Then you have to assume, okay, well, Brock Bowers in the red zone. Will Brock Bowers be a threat in the red zone? Absolutely. So while Brock Bowers
gets in the red zone,
while Brock Bowers may not accumulate definitively more yards, he could accumulate more touchdowns. So if you believe that Brock Bowers can get 10, 11 touchdowns, then you should absolutely take him in the second round. But one of the things that I just want to bring up as my final point to tight ends, because we're going to be talking about tight ends at all. And Ant, I'm with you. I'm with you on needing a separation. I agree with that. But one of the things I do want to bring up is when we look at averages, and averages are kind of a deadly thing to look at times. So you do want to, it gives you a nice look at how that player has done throughout the season. And I just want to name you a couple of 14 or a couple of 12-point average running backs in 2023. Okay. Because that's the stats that I'm pulling up from Fantasy Pros right now. Okay. You ready? Ready, Joe?
I'm ready.
Brian Robinson Jr., Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, Ramondre Stevenson, J.K. Dobbins, Jalen Warren, Aaron Jones, right? So for me, I'm prioritizing wide receiver and I'm prioritizing running back in the first 4 rounds of the draft. If, in fact, George Kittle falls to me in round 5 or 6, I'm probably not going to say no. But I'm also staying far away from Brock in these big boards. Maybe not as much in the actual best ball manias that will be coming out.
Yeah, we'll see then.
I do want a little bit of exposure to him there, but I really don't want a lot of exposure here. It is absolutely only a right assumption to make that he's going to improve drastically in the touchdown market. But if he ends up 900 yards, 11 touchdowns, okay, I can get with it.
I think that's wildly unrealistic. I think he's ending up at 7,
but not necessarily.
And this is just fundamentally, I don't believe in the Raiders offense, and you're not going to get me into that. But we do have a Raiders question on the board here from Caleb. So, who's the DB closest to Shante Spencer? Here's the thing with rookie corners. They get the ball thrown at them like crazy. Now, he was fortunate. He caught the damn ball. So you do get a lot of love for that, Caleb. Not everyone does that. Coming down with 11 picks ain't easy. But the number one thing with rookies in general, how does the league punch back? The number two thing is they're just going to stop throwing the ball at them. That's what happens to every other elite one out there.
Joe, I mean, Shante has been in the league, went in the league from 2004 to 2012. So when we look at Spencer's career, and we think about,
I'm sorry about that.
When we look at Spencer's career and how Spencer played, I saw a really good discussion.
Holy shit, that's small writing. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry.
I saw a really good discussion on TikTok. TikTok had a debate about best safeties in the league, best DBs in the league. And when it comes to DB, in today's league, you're going to get a lot of people talking about players like Diggs, because of his capability of getting interceptions. And one of the things that I think that I like about some DBs currently, DBs that are hard hitting tend to be guys that I like a little bit more. So I do like a DB that's able to go out there and get a lot of tackles, but I do want hard hitting DBs on my team. You know, Shante Spencer was injured for a couple of seasons as well. So didn't really play a full complement of games most times. One of my favorite DBs that was out there, speaking of hard hitting DBs, was, you know, when we think about the Legion of Boom on Seattle, Cam Chancellor, you know, one of the best.
They don't let you hit anymore. I think that might be the biggest problem in the NFL.
You know, I do think DBs have gone, like, their ability to hit and make plays has gone downhill.
Well, they're not allowed to.
I don't think we truly, Caleb, have a really good comparison for guys like Ed Reed, Shante Spencer, Troy Polamalu, you know, Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor, Brian Dawkins. We don't have comparisons now to that because the game is just played differently.
Yeah, the fenceless receiver has ruined this game.
When you look at when DBs can hit, you know, it was a different game when he was playing. If we go in and we look at tackles for DBs right now, I want to name. I love some of those Houston guys and some of the guys that have played in Houston. You know, because we actually do in our fantasy leagues, we actually do a bunch of DBs, Caleb. So it's really fun to play with guys like Petrie and stuff like that. But I think that when I'm looking at tackles here, I'm just not seeing one that I really like am head and shoulders above. Let me think. I'd have to think a little bit on that one, man. I'd have to think a little bit because I really don't think there's been a DB that I've really enjoyed watching since like Ed Reed, Brian Dawkins, Sean Taylor, you know, rest in peace, Sean Taylor. It's just a different game, man. But we'll be back. Team players will be back on Monday, 3:45. So Caleb, join us back on Monday. I have a list of DBs that I like this year that could have the potential to give us some nice seasons. But be back 3:45 Eastern on Monday. We'll be doing another best ball draft. If you'd like and you hit us at the right time, join in. We're in to just talk strategy, talk about a couple players that we like. We're going to be doing this all off season. We're going to be talking about players, strategy, and whatnot. We appreciate Ant for joining the chat. If you're just watching, observing, please make sure you're joining the chat. We'll have a good conversation, and we'll see you guys 3:45 on Monday, 3:45 Eastern Standard.
Welcome to Local Football Flavor, connecting the fan bases of the NFL.